A calm morning on Yonaguni Island, the westernmost tip of Japan. The waves are gentle, tourists are still taking photos of wild horses on the grassy slopes. Locals are stopping by the same small supermarket to grab breakfast. But up in the sky, a few pale streaks from unfamiliar military aircraft appear on the horizon. And on the local radio, the announcer's voice suddenly cuts in with breaking news about a missile launch near Taiwan. Island radar stations begin to hum more intensely. A few civilian flights are delayed. Phones all over the island light up with urgent alerts. In that moment, a question that has lived for years only on conference tables suddenly turns very personal. If the Taiwan Strait really erupts into conflict, will Japan be pulled into a real war? And if the answer is yes, then what exactly happens next? Where do the missiles fall? Which warships start to move? Do people on the tiny islands of southwest Japan have to board ferries and evacuate? Or will Tokyo somehow dodge the spiral? It is no longer a distant story between Beijing and Taipei, but a scenario that could rewrite the lives of every Japanese family living on the edge of the map. Japan stepped into the post-World War II era with a powerful promise to itself, never to slide back onto the road of militarism. A new constitution, self-defense forces instead of an army, a political order built around economic prosperity rather than external conquest. For decades, Japanese people lived with the idea that if a major war broke out in Asia, it would happen far away, on the Korean peninsula, on the Chinese mainland, while their cities remained a quiet rear area under the protective security umbrella of the United States. But geography has never been kind to comfortable illusions. Look at the map. Japan's Nanseryugu Island chain stretches out like a thin bridge from Kyushu down toward Taiwan. Yonaguni, Ishigaki, Miyako are only a short flight from Taiwan's coast. Threaded between these islands is the route taken by tankers and cargo ships carrying oil, gas, and goods from the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea, skirting near Taiwan before reaching Japanese ports. If that strait turns into a battlefield, it's not only military radar that gets dragged into the vortex, it's Japan's entire economy. In Japanese eyes, Taiwan is not just a disputed island between Beijing and Taipei. It's the gateway to the sea lanes that feed the world's third largest economy. The key node in the island chain that blocks the Chinese Navy's path into the Pacific. The place where the chips are made that keep Japanese factories running. If one day, control of the waters and airspace around Taiwan lies completely in Beijing's hands, every ship heading for Japan will have to slip quietly through a gate for which China holds the key. For many years, Tokyo tried to maintain a delicate balance. On one hand, it kept its security policy rooted in the pacifist constitution and the alliance with the United States. On the other, it tried not to look like it was confronting China head-on, a crucial trading partner. But missile tests, exercises around Taiwan, stray projectiles falling near Japanese airspace, Chinese Coast Guard vessels lingering around the Senkaku Islands. All of that gradually made many Japanese realize that if they cling to the illusion of safety, they might be caught off guard on the worst possible day. So beneath the surface of "we don't like war," Japan has quietly changed. New strategy documents emphasize that peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait are directly tied to Japan's own security. Security laws have been interpreted in ways that allow military support for allies under certain conditions. Defense budgets have risen sharply, units have been redeployed to the south, and islands like Miyako, Ishigaki, Yonaguni have become forward positions rather than just tourist destinations. And yet, none of that answers the most important question. Exactly how could a Taiwan crisis pull Japan into a war? To see that, you have to look at three ropes binding Tokyo to everything that happens around Taipei: military geography, economic dependence, and the alliance with the United States. Once all three ropes are pulled tight at the same time, it becomes very hard for Japan to stay out. The first rope is military geography. In every conflict scenario centered on Taiwan, the US military simply cannot operate effectively without using bases in Japan. Aircraft, warships, submarines, logistics systems all need launch points that are close enough and safe enough. And Okinawa, Kyushu, the naval bases on Honshu are exactly those links. That means that, in the eyes of war planners in Beijing, the parts of Japanese territory hosting US bases automatically become the military rear of their opponent. If a campaign to attack or blockade Taiwan ever begins, missiles aimed at US bases on Japanese soil are almost baked into the plan from day one. The logic is brutally simple. If those bases aren't neutralized, US aircraft and ships will have too much advantage in distance and logistics. But for Tokyo, the first moment a missile falls into airspace or waters near Okinawa, no matter what it was officially targeting, is the moment every line between someone else's war and our own war is erased. The second rope is the alliance. After World War II, Japan accepted a grand bargain. It would limit its military power, and in return the United States would promise to protect it. The US-Japan Security Treaty is not a one-way contract, but a web of shared interests. American bases on Japanese soil both protect Japan and serve as launch pads for Washington's interventions in Asia. That creates a paradox. The very assets that guarantee Japan's security in peacetime can turn Japan into a target once war starts. In recent years, security laws have been revised to allow Japan to support the US and other partners if Japan's own security is under serious threat, even when Japanese territory has not yet been directly attacked. That opens the door for Tokyo to take part in escort missions, logistics, protection of shipping, strengthened missile defense, and intelligence support in a Taiwan crisis. The moment those missions are activated, Japan steps into the gray zone between peace and war. Even if its soldiers haven't fired a shot. The third rope is economic dependence. Japan is a country poor in natural resources, living off ships that carry oil, gas, and goods through narrow straits and sensitive waters. Most of Japan's energy imports pass through the South China Sea, then curve up past Taiwan before heading north. If a blockade or military threat chokes those routes, Japan's economy could tumble into crisis long before war reaches any of its cities. In other words, even if no bomb hits Tokyo, the mere strangling of Taiwan can already be a life or death threat for Tokyo. Now, tie those three ropes into a single, concrete scenario. A conflict doesn't have to begin with massive bombing runs. It could start with gray zone moves. Chinese military ships and aircraft constantly showing up near Taiwan and Japan's southern islands, exercises growing more frequent, flights and sailings through strategic straits to test reactions. In Tokyo, maps crisscrossed with arrows get pulled into meetings more often. But many still hope it's just a show of force. The next step could be a kind of soft blockade. Ships sailing near Taiwan are stopped and inspected, pressured to change course. Travel times stretch out, insurance costs jump. A few delayed shipments leave factories in Japan short of vital materials. Shipping companies are forced to choose between a shorter but riskier route or a longer, more expensive detour. Ordinary people start to feel that something is wrong. In fuel prices, in electricity bills, in the cost of daily goods. Even though no region on the map has yet been colored war zone. In that situation, it's hard to imagine the United States simply watching from afar. If Washington decides to send warships to escort commercial vessels or deploy forces to protect Taiwan, the pressure on Tokyo rises immediately. The senior ally asks to use Japanese bases, airspace, and waters for operations, and asks Japan to join missions to escort, protect, support if Tokyo agrees. And in a real alliance, it's very hard to say no. Japan has already put its hand on the war machine, even if on paper it still says it is not a direct party to the conflict. At that point, the risk of escalation lies in the smallest details. A Japanese raider locks onto a strange aircraft as a warning. A Japanese escort ship sails parallel with a US warship in disputed waters. An unidentified drone slips into airspace near Okinawa. Just one collision, one misunderstanding, one stray bullet could be enough to turn the whole region from crisis into war. And once missiles start flying toward bases on Japanese soil that host US troops, Tokyo no longer has the right to claim he's just a bystander. Another layer of tension sits inside Japanese society itself. Many people still carry historical memories of Hiroshima, Nagasaki, the bloody battles on Okinawa. They grew up hearing that Japan paid a terrible price for militarism and must keep as far away from war as possible. But at the same time, a new generation has come of age in a world of North Korean missile tests, a rising China, and Russia's attack on Ukraine. For them, the question isn't just are you against war, but also, if you don't prepare, will your country be bullied, blockaded, struck at its economic weak points? In policy debates, two phrases are heard more and more often: deterrence and resilience. Deterrence means making potential adversaries understand that if they attack Taiwan or interfere with the sea lanes, they will pay a heavy price because Japan is no longer the weakest link. Resilience means making sure that even if fighting does break out, Japanese society can still function. That there are evacuation plans for people on frontline islands, energy reserves in place, backup options for supply chains, and missile defense systems reliable enough that the public doesn't fall into panic. But no strategy is perfect. The tougher Japan becomes militarily, the more it has to accept the risk of becoming an early target in any Taiwan crisis. The tighter Tokyo's embrace of the United States, the harder it will be to keep its distance once Washington has decided to intervene. If Japan tries to stay out at all costs, it might watch its sea lanes blocked, its economy weaken, and the regional order reshaped without its voice. Japan is like a person walking a tightrope. One abyss marked war, the other passivity and decline. That's why the question, how could a Taiwan crisis pull Japan into war, is not just a military or legal puzzle. It's a question of identity. A nation once destroyed by war, rebuilt on the foundation of peace, is now forced to consider using force to protect what it has. Geography puts Japan next to Taiwan. The economy forces Japan's ships through waters around Taiwan. And the alliance drags Japan into every major decision made in Washington. When those three forces collide in the storm of a crisis, it becomes very difficult for Tokyo to say, "This is not our problem." Back on the tiny island of Yonaguni, every time an alert is finally lifted, life slowly drifts back to normal, people go back to the beach, children return to school, tourists line up to capture the sunset. But the evacuation maps taped to the walls, the drills that send residents running to the pier, the closed-door meetings in Tokyo with piles of scenarios on the table. All of them are quiet reminders that these peaceful days don't exist by magic and may not last forever. If one morning the news ticker no longer says exercise near Taiwan, but hostilities have begun, then the question will not be whether Japan is dragged in, but how Japan is pulled in, at what cost, and for how long. And if you were just an ordinary Japanese person looking toward the hazy southwest horizon, maybe the most haunting sound would not be the explosion of missiles, but the silence, the feeling that your entire country is slowly drifting toward a historic crossroads, and no one can say for sure whether there is still time to change course before it's too late.